Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parrotto. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parrotto.
Well, hello. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here because today we are going to get closer and deepen intimacy in your most important relationships. Gosh, I'm so excited about this. It is my, one of my all-time favorite subjects, and certainly it's part of life everywhere. So I just have to start by saying intimacy is everything. And today we're going to talk about the source of intimacy, the action of creating intimacy. There's a lot of syllables in that word. Self-intimacy and the role honesty plays and the skills that are necessary to deepen your relationships and also what causes loss of relationship. And at the very end, I'm going to share one exercise that I think is just kind of like an easy, quick way to say, let's create something here together, like when we're working on it. So, as a starting point, I want to share something fun with you. A couple of months ago, I bought this musical instrument that is supposedly tuned to the exact frequency of love. The 528 hertz frequency evidently is a sensational tone that has been used since ancient civilizations to manifest miracles, bring blessings, and harness a healing property. And this frequency is supposed to bring transformation and an increased amount of love energy, clarity of mind, awareness, activated creativity, and inner peace. So I wanted to play it for you as a starting, since we're talking about intimacy. And when I play it, don't think it's one of those emergency broadcast signals, and I'm not going to play it for very long. All right, so here goes. Hopefully I can do this over the radio and not blow your ears out. Here we go. Okay, what'd you think? Did you think it was cool? Okay, notice what you feel. Oh, all right. Well, so I think this is a great place for us to start. So also, before we go further, I'd love to hear from you. You know, we take this intimate journey today. If you can call in at 202-570-7057. Right? When you call in and you can talk about intimacy in your life and join the conversation, it makes everything better. So I remember when I realized that intimacy didn't just refer to a romantic relationship or the physical act of sex. I was trying to understand a conversation that I was having with a friend, and I realized that I could pay a kind of micro attention to what I was thinking and feeling. Or in that case, what the other person was thinking or feeling. So this micro attention, it had me noticing teeny tiny details about what I was feeling in my body, all of the thoughts that were attaching themselves to the moment, and emotions that didn't sync up, and even impulses that seemed as if they came like completely out of nowhere. So I suddenly realized or recognized that the moment and the words and the feelings that had me start to close my heart and back away from the conversation because I was paying such close attention. And I would have missed them if I hadn't have been attached to those minute details of the exchange. So although it was a ton to download or be with, I had power over the exact moment that I was typically unconscious to. Instead of creating distance, I could now cause closeness. And it also gave me a way to ask questions and be curious about what was happening. Again, instead of like shutting down or moving away. So this closeness, it was palpable. My mind could recognize it as something other, That was not what I was accustomed to. And in that moment, I thought, oh, I think this is what intimacy is. I thought of it as bobby pins, lots of them. And instead of seeing things in these wide swaths of generalization, I could connect with things up close. I could see more. I could see the detail. I could notice the truth about whether I was open or defending, and that created intimacy. So instead of standing 4 feet away from something in observation and missing my experiential closing up, I could be an intimate part of it and hover within an inch. And when I did this, I saw and felt so much more. That getting up close experientially, we don't often notice our hearts closing until long after it actually has happened. And it's little tiny closings, it's not big ones. So with this so much more, I had this space to relate in an entirely new way that was less fixed, and it was more exploratory, and it brought more heart to all these moments, which then allowed me to create deeper and deeper levels of connection. So intimacy, it results from this micro closeness of interconnection. And if we're willing to go inside, then we'll likely immerse ourselves in intimate sensations. So I realized I could be intimate with everything and anything, like money or time or cooking or painting or even a tree. And I have talked to people about being related to trees, but everything that lived inside of me, including my unconscious self, I could be intimate with. Literally anything that could be experienced through this bobby pin kind of connection made it more rich, it made it fuller, made it deeper. So today, we're talking about having this connection with people inside of our relationships with humans, those you care oodles about, and the ones you've chosen to share a life with. The ones you've said, I want to know you better, and I'm willing to let you know me. They're the ones you'll stretch for, right? That in some way they've reached your heart and you expect and want them to stay there. This is actually the most important thing about creating intimacy with another person. You have to truly want it. You have to want to be exposed. You have to want to open things up that you don't already know. So, before we go further, and to help today's show be a little bit more tangible for you, since we're always in just words and it's kind of abstract, I want to begin with a short how-to around intimacy. Okay, think of someone right now who you'll focus on as I walk through all this intimacy stuff, and ask yourself these questions about them. Do you really want to know every little thing about them? Are you willing to let them know every little thing about you? Okay, now watch what shows up. And where is it true? And where isn't it true? And whatever you envision, if there's a tiny voice that whispers in the back of your mind that seems like it's saying, oh, I don't know, then this is a doorway you can bring to a conversation. Whatever it is you saw. So, let's assume that you actually wanted to bring that to a conversation, because this is our exercise, right? So I want to give you a sense of what that sounds like in words. So you might say, I was listening to this radio show, and the commentator, she posed a question about whether or not I was willing to let you know everything about me, or if I wanted to know everything about you. And I realized there's this place where I don't. And you could fill in the blank. Or there's this place where I'd want more, and you could fill in the blank. Or there's this place where I'm so happy I do, and I'm so happy we've shared this. Because the key to intimacy is finding this deeper information and then finding words to go with it, and then creating the interaction and the dialogue in places that you would typically just gloss over or leave on the shelf. Okay, this is a great time to call in. I'd love to know how that little exercise went for you, or if there's somebody that's coming to mind as we begin to talk more deeply about intimacy. So I just think relationships are the most fascinating thing ever. I mean, like ever. I mean, almost nothing holds as much interest or curiosity. They give us a canvas to experience ourselves on, so we can create the most amazing work of art through this constant reflection. Every brushstroke of the self brings a different color or a texture. I happened to find a Rumi poem about reflection, and I thought I would read it right here because when I think about relationship and this reflection, it captured it. It's called Love Is. Love is a mirror. You see nothing but your reflection. You see nothing but your real face. Cool, huh? I don't know, I'm into the poem part of this. I think it's really fun. So the question is, when you're thinking about relationship, is, are you paying attention? Are you getting inside? Are you surrendering? Are you asking? And are you pondering? Because I think for many, once the relationship is established, once it's known and the newness is over, it is now seen as comfortable and useful and familiar. It provides the foundation to go and do other things with your chosen companion, to do life, to self-actualize. But we forget that the relationship, the person in it, is essential to keep creating with. I think sometimes we can feel taken for granted, and we can do the same in reverse when we've reached that point of knowing someone. So because of this, the mind tells you that intimacy has been established, and so now you're in a new place that allows for this freedom or room. Now your fears or your insecurities are worked through or handled, so you don't have to pay as close of attention. But intimacy needs constant feeding. And on that note, we've got a caller, Diana from Pennsylvania, and I would love to hear what Diana's got to say about intimacy before we go on to the next pieces about how intimacy needs constant feeding.
Hi.
Hi, Diana.
Hi.
Good to hear from you. We're talking about intimacy. Got some tidbits for us?
Well, I think I'm a little stuck on something you said a couple minutes ago, and I think my quandary is, why do I have to need to want to know every little thing about somebody, and they have to know every little thing about me to have intimacy? Does it have to go that far? Because I found myself not wanting that. But I would still like to be connected to people.
Well, intimacy is a question of degrees. So when you say that, I think, well, it'll just be limited by what you decide you can't share. In terms of a self-development piece, though, you have to think to yourself, why does that exist? That you feel that way? It's like, why do you have places? If you really think about this idea that we're whole and we're worthy and we're valuable, why would we need anything to be a secret? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Well, I don't know that I even thought that far. It just feels like a lot to share every little thing. Like from creating a friendship to saying, let's share every little thing, or creating a romantic relationship. I don't know. It's just what prompted me to call and say, oh, that seems really,
like a lot.
Hard. Yeah. Like too much.
Well, again, you get to decide that, right? And the other thing about every little thing is that we have timing, and we have how much time we're spending with people, and there's the dance that goes along with it. But really, at the end of to me, wherever you decide, oh, that's not something I can share comfortably, is pretty much the limit to how intimate you really want to be, because you're the creator of the level of intimacy.
Right. Well,
so it's a choice.
Right. I was thinking of something too as you were talking, is when you say share every little thing, am I sharing every little thing about me, or I'm sharing every little thing I think about the other person?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, to me, what actually happens is when you're in a relationship, you kind of know when you hit these places where you start withholding and don't share. So I think they're about them and they're about you, but they're more about like really opening the space for yourself and saying, I have a desire to be intimate, therefore I have a desire to share openly. Mm-hmm. So it's more about you catching the spot where you start pulling back or you start holding on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes,
okay,
it does.
Well, that helps. Yes. That helps.
Well, thank you for driving that up, because I do think it's a classic, right? I think you're not alone when you say, I don't want to share every little thing with somebody.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So thank you for calling.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Bye. So I have this hunch that others of you are having a similar thought as Diana did, and I'm so glad that she called and spoke about that and slowed us down so that we could go into it a little further. I'm going to take just a moment here to address that piece, which is the willingness to be willing to share every little thing. That's where the commitment to intimacy really is. That's where you get to notice when you begin to like hold back something. And that's those doorways or those openings that I started to talk about already. So I think at this moment, I want to leave this, but intimacy needs constant feeding. And we will return after break and dig right into that. All right?
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
So I'm Sam Parrotto, and you're listening to Expedition Self, and we're talking about intimacy today, and the idea of intimacy with all relationships, and not just with your significant other. And right now, we're about to dive into the idea that intimacy needs new and previously unrevealed material to stay fresh. And before break, I said intimacy needs constant feeding. It's like alfalfa sprouts or a freshly picked carrot just plucked from the earth, right? That's full. It's like fresh. It's new. It isn't something you've thought about 1,000 times and, has now turned into kind of an autopilot thing. Let's not forget, we're changing all of the time, even if we're not aware of it. So unless those interchanges find words, then the relationship, the shell, will start cracking. Because the thing that was giving it life to begin with, it starts retracting, and it stops infusing it with the fuel and energy that made it vibrant and lively. It starts missing that fresh information that I'm talking about. Can you think about how that's happened in other relationships in your life, where all of a sudden these new pieces of self-information just didn't keep coming into the conversation, and the next thing you know, it started to feel dry, or a little limp, or, like it was no longer vibrant. This failure to feed the source of intimate relationship, or it separates from the actual doing of relationship, is where breakdowns begin. It's also where the opportunity to create, it always existed. This is that spot I was talking about with my heart, that I didn't realize that the very place my heart started to close because I was unaware of it is also the very opportunity to share something. So intimacy happened because you brought you to the relationship. You brought your life, your energy, your vitality, your interest, your dynamism, your life force. And you bring it to that relationship and they bring theirs. And that's how it gets started. But bringing life to a relationship, it means you bring your constantly changing truth. And it also brings you, it means you bring your constantly surprised self-learning. A new relationship, by its very nature, makes this easy, right? Because you don't know someone. You haven't already experienced it. So there's this freshness that shows up. But over time, if you're not a committed and undefended self-learner, then you can see what can begin to happen. And you do have those places that Diana spoke about, the place where you say, I don't want to share this. I don't want to share that. But even that, right, tells you a lot about how you're bringing yourself in relationship. So you aren't going to be bringing your side of what makes it extraordinary when you're feeling closed up or defended or uncommitted. So relationships, while they can be totally extraordinary, any relationship that matters to you can be totally filled with intimacy. You don't just have to accept whatever it is. You can cause it by how you show up and how you occupy your inner world and how you share it. Even the place where you say, I don't know that I'm ready to share, is something to share. Listen, I'm not sure I'm comfortable sharing these things yet. Let me talk a little bit about why that is. That's helps you get closer there too, right? So I know there's a lot about relationship that just is. We show someone we care about them by being giving or thoughtful or strong and helpful. But what really created that original intimacy was the discovering of this new information about that person and what showed up inside of you during that exchange. And then how you came together when you didn't yet know each other. It's the best feeling on that planet, right? Isn't it? When you're in that new space and you're discovering. But we think it's created by shared, exchanged, reciprocated responses from others, when really we are in fact the source of that intimacy, because we're at a time when we're interested, we're committed, we're willing to share, and we're trying to gain a relationship. I want to tell you a little bit about a friend that I have. And yes, he's really a friend, no romantic extras. So I can feel myself having thoughts in the background when I'm with him, like, why didn't he ask me more about that? Or what's he really doing with my story? And I don't actually put that into words. And then I notice, as I spend time with him, that I feel this bit of emptiness emotionally, and it lingers when I'm with him. And after he leaves, makes me even a little less excited about getting together and doing something again. That's the territory of me being the source of intimacy. It's my inner stuff. It's my inner truth, my feelings. And when they don't get shared or talked about, when I'm not the one who initiates that conversation, my heart closes just a little, using his actions as justification. It's kind of unfair. And of course, I lose. That's what we want to get focused on when we're really trying to create intimacy. So inside the action of creating intimacy, we don't realize that it's something you actually cultivate by being willing to stop and catch the specific pause in the dialogue when you start pulling away, closing up, and disengaging. We start to roll through the hours and the days, letting the default parts of a relationship begin to make up for the intimacy we're actually not causing. By the time I'm done, I will have said intimacy about 75 times. So this has us just hang out together and look for pleasant places to spend time or handle life. but it doesn't open up the space for the new and the unexpected, or the unseen and yet to be revealed. Now, sometimes life will throw something at you that all of a sudden you bond over, but I'm talking about everyday creating of intimacy, where you know you're bringing yourself to it, your intention and your strength and your power. You know you're creating intimacy. Okay, this is the hack. When you break into a sweat, when you are sharing vulnerable, chancy, perilous, new, like the unexpected information, and there's the potential that the other person isn't going to respond the way you'd like. Cool, huh? It's like, okay, right. So I want to create intimacy. Why? But you have to be willing to run the risk that they will do something with what you're sharing that isn't what you intended, or that they'll be reactive or judgy, or they'll be frightened away, or they'll do something crazy like act self-defensively and say weird things that make no sense. I'm sure none of us have ever experienced that. But you know you're creating intimacy when you feel this sense of aliveness between you that's really happening because you're taking a risk to share who you really are. And then you know you've gotten somewhere you never did before. And now there's this knowledge and an emotional connection, because at some level you kind of braved the level 4 emotional rapids of connection and relationship. All right, I'm interested. If anybody's open to calling in, I'd love to know what you're doing with this conversation and how it's landing for you. So here's the number, 202-570-7057. Call-ins, right? It just makes it more fun for me. And it also helps like open the conversation in ways that I wouldn't have done it on my own. So I think for a lot of us, we think as if intimacy exists once we have a relationship. We take the case that it does because we already did that new stuff. We already are spending time with someone. We're already doing the kind of basic sharing that happens when we spend time with people. But actually causing the feeling by being willing to catch the openings, to create it, and knowing you're doing it is an entirely different story. I was married for 30 years, and I got unmarried about 7 years ago, and much of my personal growth focus during my marriage was spent understanding how what he was doing connected to what was going on inside of me. And I really did want the full ride of intimacy. At least that's what I believed consciously. But holy moly, did I get to experiment and learn because of my marriage. Like so many of those moments, I realized that although I was saying I was committed, that when I would hit those spots that were difficult and uncomfortable, that made me feel at risk, or that I was going to break into a sweat, I would clam up and not share. Sometimes I didn't even know what was going on. But I'm so grateful I got to have that form of relationship to grow inside of. Every relationship offers you this opportunity. It doesn't matter whether it works in your mind or it doesn't work, because intimacy at some level is stemming from your relationship with you. So a little bit to wrap up around my husband, my husband of not today, we still have an intimacy between us because we shared a life together. We had thousands of moments of new information that we exchanged. But, we don't bring as much of that unexpected self-information or take as many risks with each other now that we've ended that phase of life together. And I feel it in every single interaction, and my heart misses it. That's probably a subject for another show about loss and transition and change. The thing, though, that's important is to recognize that every relationship is going to offer the full ride. It's really up to us how we step into it and how we define whether we're going to do that or not. So there is this big thing that's different with my ex-husband. We don't share as much honesty now about everything. So when you're talking about a marriage where all of it is wide open for intimacy building, I definitely notice changes, the lessening of what I can or can't work with. And that sensing is part of being conscious. And that's the same sensing you do with a new friend, or it's the same sensing you do with your sister, right? Sometimes we have these very long-standing relationships, and sometimes we have the ones that just happened in the last 5 years. But we're constantly changing. And so that changing really brings us to a place where we have to think about how much honesty is going to play a role in our lives. Because if we're going to create intimacy and we're going to step inside of those spaces, and we're going to take that risk, we're going to be doing it with honesty, right? And there's a lot of misconceptions about it. It has to come with ownership and with compassion. I don't know about you, but I think a lot of us are secret keepers inside a relationship if we feel like we're going to disrupt anything that's working. We withhold things when it seems like it will alter how we're seen by the other person or how they'll feel if we're really truthful. You know, honesty is the one thing I believe we're all in some denial about, because we don't realize that withholding is dishonest. And if we do get honest, we tend to think it's static, and like once it's shared, especially if it was scary, then it's over with. We also think honesty is giving an opinion, but that's not usually the place where the real risk is for us. So we think honesty is making whatever I felt the way it is without wanting to go and revisit the truth of what actually happened, with the expectation that I could feel something different than I thought I did. We get kind of locked in there. And multiple truths that conflict with each other inside of ourselves are hardly ever fully represented through our honesty. How do you get all of that out? So we also have the way we process. We often don't share our honesty until we're sure of it. We don't share it unless it's completely worked out. Does this fit you? I just threw out a whole bunch of examples of how honesty isn't really a free, expressed, kind of like doesn't flow like the river, right? Because of all these pieces that we wrap around it. How do you think about honesty in your relationships? This is a good time to call in. I'd love to know. So think about the person you're focused on in this conversation. How much have you withheld, and what haven't you been honest about? And maybe even, do you feel like they're really honest with you? And what form does that honesty take? Does it have compassion? Does it have ownership? Is it really free of just being opinionated? Does it get inside of sharing things before they're all worked out and sewn up and packaged into pretty boxes with ribbons and bows? I usually will have some truth show up about where I haven't been honest when I ask that question. I hardly ever can find a spot where I've shared everything. So some words or visuals will cross my mind, and sometimes they're really not even big things, right? They're not even things you've intentionally withheld. Life just may have gotten in the way. So keeping a mental list of honest things that you didn't get to mention in like a live moment, you have an opportunity to return to them and say, hey, a couple of things happened, with the intention of bringing this fresh, new space, these new pieces of information that we know build intimacy. We want to be intentional about creating this. And these moments are fuel for that fire. And we want that fire. We want the sensation. We want, like I said earlier, the total ride. Because honesty is like oxygen. I don't think I got that word out very well. Oxygen, there we go, to a relationship. It's the place where it gets recreated and reinvented over and over. Because when you bring that new honesty, you're expanding and deepening and widening and thickening the very foundation of what makes you you. This is a big source of that new information that you're bringing, using the exchanges as the pause places I talked about earlier. Talking about the past is essential to relationship building. Oops, you know what? I think I'm going to stop right there because I want to take a call from Cynthia from Colorado right now, and then we'll have our break after that. And when we come back, I'll talk a little bit more about talking about the past. So, Cynthia, are you there?
Hi. Hi, Sam.
Hey, what do you think about intimacy and relationship?
Oh, this is such a great conversation, and I'm really interested in that thing you described, the moment when we stop being honest and when we lose intimacy. And I have noticed that where, like, in the beginning of a relationship, you are being so open and sharing your life and getting to know each other, and there's an acceptance. And then the minute, like, the relationship changes, like, something's at stake, you don't want to lose the relationship, so you're going to hold back. Mm-hmm. And if you hold back on something, then I think that's when the spark kind of goes out of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing that's so interesting is that the spark is the thing you're actually trying to create by holding back.
Whoa, what do you mean?
No, I'm saying that when people hold back, they're actually trying to salvage the spark. Like, that's the unconscious place.
Right. Keep it alive.
So it's actually, it's like what you said, it goes away, but in actuality, you were trying to build it.
Right.
Right?
I think that something becomes like too risky and too much is at stake. We build our identity or our life around somebody, and then there goes the intimacy because we can't risk it.
Yep. I think well said. And that's the part that's hard, because when you're in it, you don't quite know you're doing it until all of a sudden, right? There's a morning that you wake up and you go, hey, I'm not feeling the spark today.
Yeah. Like that horrible image of like being in water that slowly gets warm and then boils. Like, it just changes slowly.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in what you're saying about intimacy and how we can kind of be brave in those moments. So I appreciate what you're bringing.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate that. It sounds like you've spent a lot of time, seeing this spot that we're talking about. So thank you for adding your perspective as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks so much for calling, Cynthia. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Sam. Bye.
All right. Bye. All right, we will talk about talking about the past when we return, and we're off to break.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose. To link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
So I'm Sam Parrotto, and you are listening to Expedition Self. So we are talking about intimacy, and before I move on to like the next piece of what I was going to say, I wanted to go back to something that Cynthia was particularly speaking about, and I wasn't sure it got the attention as she spoke it, which was when she said, I don't know what happens when we actually back away from the moment of being honest, because we feel like we're need, or we're so inside of the relationship, it's just too risky. I don't think we can make a big enough deal about that. But the challenge is you have to want to see it. So when she was talking about it, it's clear that she's spent time in there and she's looking for it and she wants that spark. And that's the thing that fuels creating intimacy, is you have to want to see it for yourself. And so I really appreciated that, Cynthia, if you're still listening, that you took the time to describe that. Really, it's super for listeners to hear as well. So before we went on break, I mentioned that we're going to talk about how the past is essential for us to be able to build relationship. And I'm not talking about just the past of the length of time you've known them. It's the past from the moment you and they were born. So that does mean that you're talking about your life and you're opening. And it's the same thing, right? If I'm closed up and I'm trying to keep things private or like just to myself, then that's a place where intimacy will not come out for me. But the other part of it is that we live in a society that keeps telling you to move forward and leave the past behind. And if you're somebody that you actually agree with that, then this is a place where it might be interfering with the very intimacy and that spark that you're actually wanting to create. So I'm asking about this past thing because I think it's important to ferret out the places where you philosophically don't want to share all of that new information and the truth and the honesty about who you are and where you came from. This is what Diana was talking about earlier in the show, right? So how are you going to create this off-the-chart intimacy if you don't recognize all of the places you're uncomfortable sharing about? So as it relates to the past, I'm not talking about repeating the same stories over and over with the same outcomes from the past. That's kind of boring, right? And repetitive. No, it's the sharing while you're looking and while you're pondering and while wanting to see something new about yourself, where you're reworking a deeper understanding of who you are. That is so invigorating. It's like taking a cold shower that feels awesome. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the skills of intimacy. One of them is being committed to capturing that pause and retreat spot. The moment when there's new information or curiosity about why something's happening or how it's happening that you can go towards. Sometimes your heart's closing, but you open up dialogue rather than close your heart up and gloss over it. The other is that honesty, which I talked a lot about. Right? We spent the whole 20 minutes talking about that. And your willingness to share wide and far. And then there's working on being non-reactive, but being super aware of what you're doing with what the other person is sharing. Now, this is huge because the more you're aware of it and you get lessons about it and understand it better, it gets safer and safer to uncover and reveal new information. And remember, new information is everything in keeping a relationship growing, evolving, keeping it fresh, and deepening that intimacy. So if you're being reactive, new information is going to trail off. It's going to stop being shared because you're going to start to feel unsafe, or they are. And the volume will go down, right? It goes both ways. Because if you stop sharing, they stop sharing. If they stop sharing, you stop sharing. Right? We tie ourselves in to each other. So if you're the one who is experiencing another's reactivity, then you have a chance to talk about it. It's all material to develop intimacy, even though you have to work through not feeling so safe to go towards what there is to see and learn. That's another thing Cynthia was talking about, being brave. And this is one of the skills. You have to be brave and willing to talk about uncomfortable things if you're going to build real intimacy, deeper intimacy, right? This is where you have to go inside and find the thoughts and the feelings and the activation places so you don't back away from the moment when you can fan the flames of a more intimate space with someone. How you talk about your thoughts and your feelings, how receptive they are, has everything to do with what gets talked about or shared next. And this is what you're practicing if you're a student of this intimacy building. So another essential skill of intimacy, it represents a big opportunity, and it has to do with the way we listen and the way you listen. What are you doing with what you're hearing? Are you trying to fix whatever's being shared when it's emotional or someone feels like they're feeling or they're suffering? You know, some of the typical come-froms when we listen might sound like, how's this affecting me? Will it make me lose something that I need or feels like it matters, which is going to mean I'm going to try to do something about it? Or why am I detached from this conversation? And I might compare that to, well, what does it feel like when I'm really interested? And how often, okay, this is a big one, how often do I fake my response? Or just kind of give an autopilot, kind of rote, yeah, sure, absolutely, when I'm really actually not listening and taking in what's being said. So another important skill of intimacy is the sharing in I and doing it with experiential words. Right? Sharing in I. That means I start with I think, I feel, I'm experiencing. Every event, every interaction, it's basically being funneled and worked through your inner and past experience, the way you process information and the way you feel things. So you never want to point the flashlight at someone else and hold them responsible for any of that stuff that's really yours. Because the minute you do this, you're moving away from intimacy because you've taken yourself out of ownership and you're not being a self-learner. Now, I want to explain that one more piece. If I recognize that every interaction and every experience is at some level mine, they have theirs, I have mine, then no matter what goes on, I have to recognize that I actually am having an experience that's mine. So when I say get the flashlight off of them, there's never a moment that's just about the other person. They are having whatever they're having, but you're then having what you're having on your side. So we're working through these skills of intimacy. And so this one is the one where you get really straight with yourself. And it goes along with that flashlight on yourself, right? And realizing all the experiences you have are yours. You got to look seriously at who you're being and things and be willing to make things true that you can't necessarily see. It's an important element, being willing to make things true that you can't see, to try on the other person's perspective, to get in their world. And what you're looking for sometimes isn't the word they're using or the way they depict it. You're looking for the place in yourself that you can go find the match for it. And by the way, when you do that looking, if you're sharing that with them and you're opening it up, you are building intimacy, even if it feels like you're looking for something that you might actually relate to as negative. And lastly, you have to be honest about your needs. I cannot tell you how many people, and I'm going to include myself to some extent, are just so uncomfortable having needs. Acknowledging them, sharing them, working through them, recognizing your discomfort around them. There's something about this idea that if I have a need, you can't have your need met, or if you get your need met, I can't have mine. So lots of skills you can bring to intimacy building. And I hope that you'll find the conversation we've just been in, that you'll pick one to apply to that relationship that you're using as your focus for this. So how do we begin to lose intimacy in relationship? Because resentments happen when we don't fully get inside of what's going on for the other person. So rigidity is the kiss of death in relationship, because it's like erecting walls in open hallways or foyers. Next thing you know, you have to walk around the wall, right? So this idea of rigidity means, like, how do I soften? How do I open? How do I try on a different perspective? Because remember, I'm learning. I'm wanting to be a self-learner because I want intimacy in my life. The whole thing is made more difficult because we have to have room for our own voice and our unique way of seeing the world. Have you found yourself all of a sudden becoming nitpicky or critical of someone you care about? that's one of the ways we know like resentments are happening. And that's where you can go back and say, wait just a minute, where has rigidity happened? Where have I stopped bringing my truth and my honesty? Another example is you may start to notice zingers being thrown in the company of others. Like sarcasm seems to find its way more than you typically might bring it, or jokes are made at the other person's expense. They're big indicators that resentments are working beneath the surface. And these resentments are moments when you miss that opportunity to pause, move towards the relationship and communicate and be honest, look for new information, and reflect on who you were being or how you got rigid. So, okay, I just want to make sure where we are time-wise, because I want to make sure I get to this 15-minute thing here. All right. So speaking of rigidity, one of the skills that's super important if we're going to keep getting to that intimate sweet spot is that we can't make another's rigidity or way of seeing the world wrong, which is easy to do if we ourselves are trying not to be rigid. So instead, we want to understand it, be curious and patient, engaged. But sometimes, though, we're trying to learn about something that they need to understand, and it takes time. And sometimes we're rigidly trying to get them to look at their rigidity. So this could mean we get locked up together. And sometimes that's exactly what we have to do until we work our way through it. Sometimes loss of intimacy in a relationship happens because we're kind of lazy and we don't want to talk through all that's happening or going on. So you have to remember that most of what we bring to relationship is how we're in relationship with ourselves. Most of what we bring to relationship is how we're in relationship with ourselves. So this rigidity, the sidestepping truth with yourself, the places where you get a little lazy and getting to the reality of your feelings, or the moments you don't want to know anything new about yourself, the way you listen. I know I'm giving you a list, or you get reactive when you feel uncomfortable with things. This is how you will be in relationship with others. So as a final thought about what you bring to the relationship and building of intimacy, I want to highlight how important it is to get very clear about what needs that person is meeting. What are the agreements you've made together? How are you filling out your sense of acceptability or your value or self-worth through what you're offering and what they're offering? Because a lot of times we don't want to realize that the other person is holding some piece of our sense of being good enough or our need for security. Agreements change, actions change, people don't share as much, and before you know it, the joy of relating and building intimacy peels away, and we're left with another layer of relating. Now, I think I've gone as far as I'd like to go with this with this intimacy conversation. And you can see I just did the Freudian slip because the next layer to this would be to start talking about how power plays in a relationship. I'm pretty sure that's a topic for another day. I wanted to give you an exercise that I think instantaneously will shift a relationship. It's kind of like if you can get the person you're with to agree to do it with you, within a half an hour, you can be back in a new place. So the way this works is that you each take 15 minutes. Actually, it takes a little more than a half an hour. You each take 15 minutes, and the first person talks. And they really talk about everything that's on their mind, everything that's there. And then when they get done, the other person says back to them, "This is all the stuff I heard." Now, the key to this is it's really got to be what you heard, but you can add compassion and empathy to what you share back. Then the other person can say, "Well, yeah, you got that there, but on that piece, I think you missed what I was really trying to say." Then you flip, right? And then the other person does it. And I have never done the exercise. I still do it, even though I started doing it in my 20s. I have never done it without discovering something about myself or about that other person. I mean, it's really remarkable that just 30 minutes or 45 minutes of listening and practicing and paying attention can reset this open space that I've been talking about through the whole show. Because sometimes we need help to open back up again. Sometimes we're not even aware that we've actually started backing up or letting life get in the way. And so, even if you took on, okay, let's do this once a week and see what happens. There's something to be gained. Okay, well, I hope that you found this informative and inspiring and helpful. I really wanted to thank my callers who added their perspective and their experience as we talk about intimacy. And I also, next week, we're going to talk about fear and all the ways that fear plays a role in our life, both the conscious fear and the unconscious fear. I did find a poem for today, and this poem is by Michael Faudet, Faudet, and it's called Proximity. I was pretty excited when I found it. So here goes, because I like to close out with a poem. We joined the dots from A to B, the line we drew from you to me, traced empty shores across the sea, over mountaintop, past forest tree, along the roads and walking tracks, all bridges burned, no looking back. For the love we have, no gate can stop, no barking dog or bolted lock. For what is real is meant to be when two hearts beat in proximity. Thank you so much for sharing this hour with me. I look forward to hearing about your intimacy opportunities and adventures. Have a great day.